Being locked down means I can't get out and fly, but it does mean I've got around to looking at a few things that I put on the back burner. Now, I've had this Crocodile 7 long-range quad from GEPRC since last year, and it hasn't really made an appearance on the channel yet. I just haven't had the time with all the other stuff that's been going on. Now, this is a very different quad to what you may be used to, and has given me a total change of mindset on FPV. Let me start by telling you what this is not. This isn't a racer or an out-and-out acro quad, but it is a long-range quad that will get you cinematic HD footage. It's fantastically tuned for smooth flying and some gentle acro, and is definitely the most relaxing FPV flying you can get. It's even better than an FPV wing because it's so smooth. If you always wanted an FPV Mavic that'll do acro, this is definitely for you. You can sort of think of it as a Grand Tourer that'll do light freestyle and get you that awesome slow flow cinematic video footage. Flight times are typically 10 minutes with a 6S 2200 mAh LiPo, which is really good for an FPV quad. But I wanted more. So here's how I managed to squeeze 34-minute flight times out of this. Welcome to the Whirly Bloke channel. If you haven't seen the GEPRC Crocodile 7 before, here's a quick rundown. It's pretty large, especially if you've been used to flying popular tiny whoops and cine whoops, 3 inches and so on. I mean, that's a Mavic, very similar sort of size. And with these 7-inch props on it, it looks absolutely massive. And there's so much room inside the frame, it's incredible. This is the Pro version. Up front, there's a RunCam split mounted on this 3D printed TPU mount. And the split PCB is just under there. And I fitted this with a TBS Crossfire, but there's an issue with finding a spare non-inverted UART. The GEP Span Pro F4 50 amp tower in here has only got 3 UARTs. There's one inverted for S-Bus, one for IRC Tramp, and that's to switch the VTX channel and the power settings, and the third one is for the GPS on the back here. And because Crossfire requires a non-inverted UART, I've had to sacrifice something. And since I want to keep the GPS, because it's long range, I've wired the Crossfire up to the Smart Audio, which is UART 3. So I'll just have to change the VTX channels using the buttons on the stack, just down there. It's just an inconvenience, and at some stage I'll look at using soft serial, although I'm not actually sure there's enough I/O pins on the flight controller to do that. So this has got GPS mounted on the back here on this TPU 3D printed mount, which is very nice. It's a BN220 dual GPS GLONASS module, so I can get position information in the Betaflight OSD as well as use rescue mode. And the frame is very nicely made. It's 2.5mm carbon and the arms are 5mm, and they're sandwiched between the top and the bottom plates. This probably isn't as strong as racer type construction, but even so, I don't think it really needs to be. It's plenty strong enough and it's very stiff. The motors are GEPRC branded GR2306 1600 kV, and these are a nice low RPM motor for 6S running these massive 7-inch tri-blade props. It flies really well on this combo, and the huge benefit is just how quiet this is. You only need to be about 30 meters up and it's like a stealth quad. Now, it's pretty much accepted that a Mavic 2 is a quiet drone. So here's mine hovering in still air and measured at about 2 meters away. and here's the Crocodile 7 for comparison. Now this is designed to run on 6S, and GEPRC recommend using 2200 mAh LiPos. And when you're up there flying around enjoying the view, that will give you an excellent 10 to 12 minutes. Now that's very good for an FPV quad, but once you get up there quietly cruising around, it's more like the experience you get when you're flying a wing. But unlike a wing, you can do all the usual quad maneuvers, and you don't get that jerky roll footage if you fly smoothly. It's a totally absorbing experience, and it changes how you think about FPV. It's not all fast and furious, which makes a real change. It's more like flying a Grand Tourer, reasonably fast, capable, and it gets you from place to place effortlessly. Unless you experience it for yourself, you can't really appreciate just how relaxing it is to fly. I've tried flying the Crocodile on larger packs to extend the flight times. I've tried a few different LiPo packs. These lighter ones are pretty good. This is 1050 mAh, which is not too bad, but it's pretty light. I've even tried flying it on these. These are 4800 mAh 3S, putting them in series. But this gets quite heavy. And it doesn't give you that much more flight time because they get heavy and the cutoff voltage is still quite high. And they suddenly drop off like a cliff, as we all know. Now, if you've watched my previous video on building lithium ion 6S battery packs, you'll now understand why I needed them. I was keen to try them on a long-range quad to see how they performed. Lithium ion batteries are more energy dense than lithium polymer, but due to their chemistry, they've got a higher internal resistance. So they're better suited to delivering sort of medium currents, but for longer periods. LiPos are great for that 95C punch-out type performance, but we don't need that for long range or long duration cruising. If you're using LiPos, you'll probably know the voltage range is typically 3 to 4.2 volts. And you don't want to ever discharge them any lower than 3 volts or you'll just kill them. And that's why we set our Betaflight voltage land now alarm to about 3.5 or 3.3 if you're brave. Ideally, you want to land and the voltage needs to recover to about 3.5 volts shortly afterwards. It keeps the LiPo in its sweet spot, and as we know, if you don't look after them, they go all puffy and drop off in performance quickly and are pretty difficult or impossible to charge. But lithium ion, particularly 18650 cells, have a lower voltage of 2.5 volts. So in theory, you can run them down further than LiPos. In theory maybe, but in practice it's not quite that simple. Anyway, I wanted to see with my own eyes how lithium ion batteries performed on this Crocodile 7 before I try any real long range or long duration flights. Now, because of lockdown, I had to do these tests in the garden, so these aren't exactly realistic flight times, but it's a good indicator of what can be achieved. First of all, I ran it with a single 3400 mAh pack, and this hops up into the hover like it always did on LiPos, and it flies just like it did before. It hovers in ground effect at about 15% throttle, and out of ground effect at just a little bit more, maybe 20%, something like that. It's a bit difficult to tell. It felt about the same as the bigger LiPos that I've used, and this quad doesn't have great punch-out performance. It's not really designed to be honest. So I decided to ignore any low voltage warnings. In fact, I disconnected the buzzer so it didn't distract me and influence the test. And I just flew around the garden until it died, or as close as I could feel, as it wasn't responding to the throttle as I dare. I didn't really want to kill these, to be honest. As soon as the quad landed, I measured the battery voltage and used a cell checker just to see what the real values were. And on one of the single 6S 3400 mAh packs, this flew for 20 minutes. And the final voltage was 19.5 volts. And the cells were all around 3.2 volts. That was higher than I'd expected, but 20 minutes flight time is pretty impressive and very surprising. I was expecting maybe 15. And the packs were only very slightly warm to the touch. So I let them cool down for about 10 minutes and the cell voltage had crept back up to 3.3 volts. And that's perfect. But if the discharge voltage is 2.5 for lithium ion, why does it seem to give up at around 3 or 3.2 volts? The motors, ESCs and flight controllers will work at a much lower voltage. But it's about the point at which they deliver enough power to fly. These motors are designed to run on 6S. So when the voltage gets down to maybe 18 volts or less, there simply isn't enough power. But the good thing is these batteries are working well within their operating voltage, so they're just not stressed. Remember, lithium ion full discharge voltage is 2.5 and LiPo's is 3.1, 3.2, that sort of level. Now, what's interesting is the way this performs. After about 18 minutes, it was starting to feel sluggish on the throttle and I thought, that's it. But it just keeps going. It just degrades slowly and gives you plenty of warning it's on its way out. Now, 20 minutes is a very respectable flight time and much better than I'd expected. But could I get more? So, I put 2 of these in parallel to make it a 6800 mAh pack. Any guesses what it's going to do? I expected another 5-8 minutes, something like that, given these packs are about 200 grams each. So I tried the same test again.
Armed.
20 minutes passed, 25 minutes passed, and my fingers were going to sleep. I've never flown an FPV quad for that long, and concentration can drift just tiptoeing around in a tight space, flying line of sight. It finally gave up after an incredible 34 minutes, and checking the cell voltages immediately after the flight, and they're all balanced and discharged down to about 3.25 volts, same as before on one pack. But what was more surprising was the amount of throttle. With double the weight in batteries, it still hovered on around 25% throttle setting, out of ground effect. And the all-up weight of this, with 2 batteries, is 995 grams. And that's Mavic territory. Yes, I know this isn't a proper flight test. Hovering around the garden at 1 metre isn't exactly a great flight profile. And when the lockdown's over, I'll get out and I'll try some proper flights with a bit of gentle acro. But at least I know what the bench limits are. I mean, this doesn't feel a lot different to how my old heavy Vortex 250 felt. And for long range cruising, it looks perfect. I can't wait to get out and give it a try. But I will be carefully calibrating the OSD voltage monitor and keeping a close eye on the flight time and the battery volts in the goggles OSD. Realistically, I guess I'll get around 25 minutes usable flight time. I don't recommend lithium ion for acro or racing, but for long range or long duration, they're a great choice. And when I flew this on LiPos earlier in the year, I had to think a lot further ahead and pull out of manoeuvres very early because of the extra weight and the lower power. But once I know it's all okay, I'll strap my GoPro 8 on the front here. The runcam split's okay, but the stabilised footage from the GoPro will look fantastic. As always, thanks for watching, and if you found that useful, give me a thumbs up and leave a comment. And if it's your first visit, then please do the subscribe-y belly thing up here to get notified when I post new content. I'll see you next time.